I think he had to resign because he lost the pledge of allegiance from the armed forces and the police service, which are two very critical factors for him, to remain in power. And that he lost. And that was the reason why he resigned. Protests have been going on for 21 days already. And there have been more violent protests in this country in the last 6-7 years. You must have seen there were much bigger protests, more violent protests, more serious protests, but nothing affected the government. And I believe that had President Nasheed enjoyed the confidence and loyalty of his armed forces and the police service, he would still have remained in power, and the protests per se by themselves alone would not have an impact on the government. That way I believe a mob cannot overthrow a president in this country. A protest cannot overthrow a president in this country. It has to be other factors. Day before yesterday was a combination of several factors. I think the key immediate factor is constantly subjecting the military and the police to the brink of tolerance. I mean, they just got tired, they got exhausted, and they were faced with a ruler who was asking them to comply with unlawful or unconstitutional orders, and they knew that. And there was a time, there was a limit they could go, and on Tuesday by 1 p.m. that limit had come.
Going back to yesterday's events, we saw MDP activists burn down courthouses, police offices in islands, and even many private and public property was damaged in the capital itself. As a legal professional, what actions do you think would be or could be taken against them?
Oh, naturally, vandalism is a criminal offense in this country, and terrorism is an offense in this country. They can be prosecuted for the acts that they have committed. Whether the government or the prosecutor general would want to go for selective prosecution of serious offenders alone, or only selective instances, that's all up to an independent institution called the prosecutor general himself, And as far as the government or the Home Ministry or the Maldives police concerned, for them, these people, by burning down courthouses, by burning down court documents, by harming property, they have, or by threatening people, they have committed a serious criminal offense, and all of that has to be investigated and submitted for prosecution. It's all up to the prosecutor to decide which statutes to cite, which sections to pick, or which crimes to prosecute for.
As the Vice President of the Nasheed administration, we saw Dr. Wahid as a silent man but with strong opinions. But Nasheed has already slammed him in international media, calling him someone who has always had designs on the crown. In your opinion, can Dr. Wahid lead the country into a more peaceful time? Can he handle the situation?
Two things again. A vice president is always there to take up the crown. There is no need for a vice president to be elected with the president unless he is ready to take up the position of the president. It's not only because of Wahid. That's the system we have developed for ourselves. We have a twin executive system, meaning to say that we elect twins. One as president, the other as vice president. Vice president is by constitution required to take over the president's job once the president becomes incapacitated permanently, or he resigns, or even during times where he is temporarily prevented from discharging the functions of his office. So a vice president is there to assume the presidency in case at the time he is needed to do so. That is how we have developed the system. Then the other issue, whether he could wade through the times and whether he could deliver us safely to the next elections, I would like to give him the benefit of doubt. I personally don't know the gentleman. I have only had very few conversations with him. I have only admired him on television. I know he has a decorated track record in international civil service, but I have not seen him in action. So like any other Maldivian, I would like to wait and see, and even go to the extent of offering any support I can in helping him run his administration in the areas that I'm familiar with, law and constitution perhaps, But I would like to wait and see, and I would like to give him the benefit of doubt, and I would like to give him the space for his administration to succeed. And I would want to support him in Parliament so long as rule of law is upheld and the constitution prevails.
We now bring you a report looking back at the events that led to the former President Mohamed Nasheed's resignation. Take a look. The activities led by 23rd December Alliance for 22 consecutive nights ended unexpectedly. The protests, which began at the MMA area, ended at Artificial Beach. When MMA grounds were closed, protesters moved to the fish market area and the streets of Male. Protests took a turn for the worse when the protesters started gathering at the Artificial Beach area. Since then, every night, MDP activists gathered at the area and tried to counter the peaceful protests. The protests, which were being held to oppose the unlawful arrest and detention of Criminal Court Chief Judge Abdullah Muhammad on the orders of former President Mohamed Nasheed, ended in the most unexpected manner. Like other nights, on the 6th, when 23rd December Alliance members of the public and opposition parties gathered at the Artificial Beach area to continue the protests, MDP activists were already gathered there. Before the protests could really begin, things heated up when protesters and MDP activists started exchanging verbal attacks. Before things could take a violent turn, police arrived at the scene and started to separate the crowds to stop violence from erupting. However, police were soon ordered to move from the area on the orders of their leading commander. Police moved from the area upon the arrival of the defense force. As soon as police left the area, clashes erupted between protesters and MDP activists. While they were throwing stones and other objects at each other, the defense forces stood idly by. Police who left the area suddenly arrived at the scene and started to control the violence. When police officers left the area, their discontent was clearly evident from their faces. The police force marched to the Republic Square, and the events that took place after that would not have been predicted by anyone. They started protesting the unlawful orders that were being issued to them by the government. Soon, officials of the defense force were deployed to counter the police and to try and convince them to reconsider their actions. However, the number of protesting police officers kept increasing. Then, recently resigned President Mohamed Nasheed even attended the protest and asked the police to drop their arms and to give in to the MNDF, promising them no harm if they did that. When he attended the protest, neither the police commissioner Ahmed Fasih nor Home Minister Hassan Afif had addressed the situation. Police, however, did not allow Nasheed to address them and called on the authorities to free the uniformed bodies. At around 8 o'clock in the morning, the first clashes erupted between police and the armed forces. The MNDF first used a large amount of tear gas and started filing into the Republic Square. The police who were protesting took up the challenge and confronted them. MNDF officials then fired rubber bullets against the police and other protesters. But police did not relent. With the help of shields that their allies at the police headquarters threw to them, they confronted the army, while civilian protesters threw stones and other objects at the MNDF officials. That resulted in the MNDF going back into the army headquarters. While these confrontations were going on, no one knew the exact location of Mohamed Nasheed. However, witnesses said that he was in the MNDF headquarters. Suddenly, celebratory cheers erupted in the Republic Square when some officials of the police defected to the opposition. More MNDF officials kept joining the police protesters, and MNDF and police officials from nearby islands also came to Male to join the protest. What we heard after that was that protesters from the uniformed bodies had set conditions for the government. They demanded the president to resign by 1:30 and for the police commissioner Ahmed Fasih and his 2 assistants to resign as well. They said that the conditions were not negotiable. The police commissioner Ahmed Fasih was the first to give in to the conditions set by the opposing forces when he resigned. After realizing the situation and the mindset of police and defense force, former President Mohammad Nasheed also decided to resign. He announced his decision at a press conference held at President's office at 1 o'clock. Although he announced that he resigned voluntarily, less than 24 hours into his resignation, President Nasheed and his allies started claiming that he was forced to resign at gunpoint. That was a summary of the events that led to former President Mohammad Nasheed's resignation. We have in the studio South Kurdufashi MP Mohammad Nasheed to comment on the crisis. You said earlier that the former president deemed himself all-powerful, and we have seen that he has a lot of power, especially in the international community. We have media groups coming to Maldives to cover this event and covering exclusively the perspective of former President Nasheed. And talking to international media at his residence today, President Nasheed said that he hoped the international community would act quickly to prevent his detention or arrest. What pressures can the international community put on the Waheed administration?
I meant he was all-powerful in a totally different local political context. I meant that he was a very strong executive president. He had a very substantial number of MPs in parliament. He had a large party.